Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of the Defund, Re-envision, Transform webinar series. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I'm the Manager of Community Collaborations at Arch City Defenders, and I want to pause for a moment so my partners and colleagues in this work can introduce themselves. I'm going to pass it to Jay.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jay. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the abolition organizer at Action St. Louis. I will pass to Lucy.
Hi, folks. My name is Lucy. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the Justice for All Policy and Systems Change Fellows at Forward Through Ferguson, and I'll pass to Trey.
Hey everybody, name is Trayvon, go by Trey. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the other Policy Systems Advocacy Fellow over at Forward Through Ferguson. Glad to be here with y'all. Last but not least, Emmanuel.
Hi everyone, Emmanuel Powell. I use he, him. I'm a Skadden Fellow and Staff Attorney at Arch City Defenders. Excited to be here tonight.
The mute button kicks my butt all the time. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. We're very excited to present part 2 of our webinar series to you. Emmanuel, if you can go to the next slide. This is the agenda for tonight. I'm gonna get us started off by kind of going over the overview and what we covered just a smidge 2 weeks ago for part 1 of our webinar teach-in series. Next slide, please. Great. Campaign overview. Welcome to the Defund, Re-envision, Transform campaign. It is a grassroots campaign anchored by 4 organizations: Action St. Louis, CAPCAR, Forward Through Ferguson, and Arch City Defenders. This campaign has 3 basic demands. 1, we want to defund St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. 2, we want to re-envision public safety through reinvestment in the community and in the resources that actually keep our communities safe. And 3, we want to transform the St. Louis region by re-envisioning and by defunding the police. Next slide, please. So, there's a lot of hoopla going on right now about what we mean when we say defund. And when we say we want to defund the police, we mean we actually want to defund the police. We mean the process of reallocating funds and responsibility from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department into community-based systems of safety, prevention, and de-escalation. It is a demand that we reduce the size, scope, the budget, and the power of all institutions that surveil, police, punish, incarcerate, and kill Black people to 0, and invest in building entirely new community infrastructures that will produce the real, genuine public safety and sustainability for all of our communities. It is the demand to defend Black lives by shutting off resources to institutions that harm us and redirect them by redirecting them to meet our community's needs and increasing our collective safety. Next slide. So when we say re-envision, this is the fun part. This is where we get to use our imaginations and think and dream big about what it is that our communities actually need, how we can take that money and resources and actually make our communities safer. Things like quality, affordable housing, accessible housing, universal quality health care, mental health services, income support, a safe and living wage, employment, education, and importantly, youth programming. Next slide. When we say transform, by transform, we mean the ideas we have re-envisioned and fundamentally shifting the structure and systems we live with here in St. Louis. For example, taking the 911 call system out of the police department and making sure it's managed by trauma-informed non-police service providers. Community funds to provide direct cash relief to people in need to prevent poverty and other root causes of crime. And 3, non-law enforcement administered and staffed emergency response teams equipped to handle mental health services, substance abuse, and housing crises. Next slide. And here I am going to turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Inez. So the demands of this campaign, we're demanding that we defund SLMPD vacant positions, SWAT, Shot Spotter, Real-Time Crime Center, police overtime. Our re-envision demands, we want to spin off units like traffic, drug enforcement, domestic abuse, juvenile, and internal affairs into departments like streets, health, human services, and personnel, and empower civilian staff trained in trauma-informed case management to interview victims and draft incident reports. For transform, we want to build a permanent structure to re-envision efforts to systematically and permanently create community-centered approaches to public safety, removing our reliance on policing and the arrest and incarcerate model. Next slide, please. So the campaign's recent events. We created a toolkit already, which introduced the campaign to the public, and we can drop all these links in the chat later on. We filled the public safety or the public testimony at the Board of ENA budget hearing. That's where we got $4 million cut from SLMPD vacant positions and invested into things like victim support services, supporting the unhoused community, Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We held a vigil on the anniversary of George Floyd's murder and uplifted the names of folks killed by police violence. We held our first part of the webinar on defund, really examining the police budget. And then we had public testimony at the Ways and Means public hearing, where we pushed for further cuts to get that 4 million, where we already got that 4 million, but we are pushing still right now as the budget cycle is still going on for more cuts. Next slide, please. And now we're going to talk about the case for re-envisioning. I'm going to turn it over to Lucy.
Yes. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm excited to learn and re-envision with you all this evening. So Inez and Jay gave us a really great overview of what we've been up to for the past couple of months, the demands that undergird our campaign. And the next section of our presentation is around that re-envisioning, that fun, creative, imaginative work of building the future that we would like to live in, building the society that we want to live in. We're going to spend a little bit of time diving into some of the reasons that re-envisioning is an essential part of DRT's Defund SLMPD campaign. So it's not defunding the police is a fundamental ask, and we want to know how to use that money, how to allocate those resources. So the first thing that we're going to do to re-envision and explore with one another is actually break into small groups and think about this together. So if you could go to the next slide, Emmanuel. So I hope that that was a fruitful conversation. If there were any, really awesome ideas that folks presented, please feel free to share them in the chat so that we can all kind of collect ideas together. I'm going to keep us moving though just so that we're conscientious of time, and we'll have more chances to connect and together share questions at the very, very end. So Emmanuel, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. I wanted to, after that conversation, just sort of present what I think is a valuable grounding quote from Mariam Kaba. She suggests that the surest way of reducing police violence is to reduce the power of police by cutting budgets and the number of officers. And continues to say, but don't get me wrong, we're not abandoning our communities to violence. We don't want to just close police departments. We want to make them obsolete. We should redirect the billions that now go to police departments towards providing healthcare, housing, education, and good jobs. If we did this, there would be less need for police in the first place. And I'm guessing that much of this aligned maybe with some of the ideas and thoughts that folks shared in the small group breakout rooms, and is going to continue to be an important part of our conversation. But we also wanted to kind of back up and set some grounding for the situation that we're within as it relates to crime and violence and this public safety system, what this public safety system is responding to. So Emmanuel, if you could go to the next slide. We wanted to share this graphic, which sort of gives a depiction of violence. I would imagine that maybe some of you share this experience. When I was growing up, I was sort of socialized to understand violence as something that police responded to, that public safety meant that there wasn't violence in my community, and that if there was violence or unsafe situations, that police were someone who you could call to help respond to that. And in reality, as this graphic depicts, violence is much more complex than just what is covered in the lens of policing. And police, as we'll talk about in a bit, actually aren't very good at responding to this multifaceted, really complex violence that exists. So one definition of violence that I wanted to share with folks is the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community, that either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. So again, just to reiterate, this is a really broad definition. It's not something that aligns with necessarily the role that police fulfill, and yet we expect police to serve as the folks who protect us from violence when things are deemed unsafe. So this, and I think that this is just like a helpful baseline for us to think about as we continue to move towards abolition and defunding and re-envisioning. Next slide. The other really important thing is that there's many different factors that contribute to that graphic of violence across our city, across the country, across the world. Things like individual factors, relational, community, and societal factors, sort of in this really complex and interrelated way, create situations where violence happens. I think it's really important to name, though, that these factors or root causes aren't one-to-one, right? So it's not just that somebody has one of these factors and then violence happens. It's kind of how, as a society, we respond to that, how we've created systems that exacerbate or address some of these factors. And this, again, kind of provides us a foundation upon which to think about abolition and re-envisioning our current public safety system, which doesn't do a good job addressing these root factors. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, Emmanuel, I'm going to kind of walk through these factors. So individual root factors of violence are characteristics that increase the likelihood of being a victim or a perpetrator of violence. And these all are from a UN report, which I'm happy to link to after I've talked through everything. Things like substance use or abuse, prior history of aggression, relationship factors recognize that groups like one's intimate partners, family members, and or peers have the potential to shape an individual's behaviors. Think about folks we look to as mentors in both good and negative, or positive or negative ways, intimate partner situations. Community includes the context in which social relationships are embedded. And then societal factors are those that create a climate for violence, reduce inhibitions against violence, and or create and sustain gaps between different segments of society. So here we could think about gun policies or harm reduction versus punitive reactions when folks are found using substances. So all of these root factors and this broader definition of violence, I think, helps us to create like a foundational context for understanding the system that we're working within, and sets us up to be critical of public safety and policing as it currently exists. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Trey to talk through the next couple of slides that we have on our case for re-envisioning.
Thanks so much, Lucy, for that overview. Again, I think it's really important to understand sort of, the broad context of our landscape right now, both, what is violence, what causes violence, and also, if you go to the next slide, Emmanuel, we want to talk about just a brief, little brief points on the state of policing here in St. Louis. or just, in general. I think it's important, in talking about our case for re-envisioning, why it's important that why do we focus on police? Why do we focus on trying to delegitimize and trying to defund the police? So just in general, I think it's important to understand that policing started, at least here in the US context, as, mass police departments really started as slave patrols. So they were departments and workers who were hired to catch slaves, and to keep a system that was dehumanizing and extracting labor and economic vitalization from a group of people. So it will never be not tied to a history of anti-Black racism here in the US and the protection of exploitative capitalism. I think that's like a fact. It's not really something that is an opinion. It's something that is actually true in how our police department was formed here in the US. Also, some statistics from mappingpoliceviolence.org. It's a website that I highly recommend you all go through. It gives some really, to me, shocking stats around police violence here in the States. So for St. Louis specifically, St. Louis police kill around 87 per 100,000 people in St. Louis, which is actually the highest. I'm sorry, I'm talking wrong. That's the last point. The first point, homicides, there are about 87 killings per 100,000 residents here in St. Louis. So we have a large homicide rate. I think all of us know that St. Louis is one of the most violent and dangerous cities in the US. That is a reality here in our region. Violent crime with Black residents being more than 2.5 times as likely as white residents to be a victim of violent crime. So violent crime is something that is a reality and something that we definitely don't want to shy away from. I think the issue is, what tools do we want to use to address that violence? I think our case right now is that it's not police, it's not our current public safety system. And then to this last point, which I was going into before, police kill more people per capita here in St. Louis at SLMPD, more than any other police department across the country. So around 16.9 per 1 million people here in St. Louis. And that's far above the next one, which I think is around 10 people per 1 million people. So pretty high rates of police violence, which I think is important to understand that police are not always the best people to respond to violent crime. Also, innovations and reforms don't do much to make us safer as well. So programs like Shot Spotters, RT, CT, SWAT, even things like police training and also like diversity training, use of force training in police departments. Those are things that have been tried throughout like the past 50 to 100 years of try to combat police brutality. We haven't seen any correlations between the decrease in crime and those measures. So it's important for us to just really re-envision and to, again, be creative and really be honest with ourselves on the root causes of violence and how we can combat it. Next slide. So yeah, just this note, there's often a mismatch between, as we were saying, like the root causes of violence, what actually causes violence, and the tools with which we use to address that violence. So violence and its root causes are complex and have to do more with how our society, cultures, and governments are structured. Our public safety system has had its focus on the results of violence and not on the factors that produce violence. So we focus on the fact that there is high crime rate, there is high homicide rates, but not necessarily what cultivates or what creates this, what situations are pliable to like homicides existing, like what is true about certain neighborhoods, certain communities, like poverty, economic devastation, gentrification that causes certain cases to be violent over others, and not focus on just the murders themselves. We cannot police and incarcerate our way out of violence and crime. We have to invest in people and in our communities. We look at places, where there's low crime rates, where there's not a lot of police surveillance, and you see housing. People have housing. You see people have access to economic opportunity. They're able to be economically mobile throughout their life. They have access to great education. These are things that are fundamental that we all want, our kids and ourselves to have, that actually produce safe neighborhoods and safe societies. So what we're suggesting is that we use different tools other than police, use different tools other than our current incarcerate model to address these issues in our society. You go to the next slide. So this is a great quote by Derica Purnell that says, so if we abolish the police, what's the alternative? Do we call As someone who grew up calling 911, I also shared this concern. I learned this. Just because I did not know an answer didn't mean that one did not exist. Rather than thinking of abolition as just getting rid of police, I think about it as an invitation to create and support lots of different answers to the problem of harm in society, and most exciting, as an opportunity to reduce and eliminate harm in the first place. I think it's a really powerful quote because I think sometimes, those who are taken aback by the term defund, or those who have concerns, or, if there's no police, then what happens? I think if we turn to ourselves and turn to our community and, ideating and thinking about different ways that we can cultivate safety in our neighborhoods, things that we know keep us safe as people who live and thrive and have families and are in relation with each other, I think that we can come up with those solutions. Next slide, please. So we're gonna do one more breakout tonight. Thanks everybody for your wonderful thoughts. I thought my group had a good discussion. I hope y'all's did. If y'all want to even put some things that you talked about, you feel like you want to share in the chat, that'll be great too, just to get some conversation started. And we'll move along in our webinar. You go to the next slide. So next we're going to talk about some case studies and some re-envisioning in action, some groups that have already kind of done this. And I'll pass it over to Lucy to give that brief overview.
Yeah. So I think we kind of were in the high context, maybe imagining world, and folks are doing this across the nation in St. Louis. Next slide, Emmanuel. And we wanted to just provide some examples of how that's happening. Some of these may be familiar. I'm going to talk about the first two. In Minneapolis, there's a number of groups working together to research the history of the Minneapolis Police Department and engage in really robust storytelling interviews to figure out how police have failed to serve residents of Minneapolis. And then Reclaim the Block and Black Visions Collectives are two Black-led, queer-led organizations that are pushing for reallocation of funds, mutual aid within communities that have not been served by the police. In Oakland, similarly, there's a Defund OPD group that is working to do budget research, figure out what police are not doing correctly, think about writing and advocating for new policies, and actually have just put up 4 or 5 billboards across Oakland with a hotline number for a mental health first response, where you can call that instead of calling 911 or instead of calling the police to get mental health first aid and an emergency response in a mental health situation. So this is happening. Inez, you want to talk about St. Louis?
Yes. So, re-envisioning public safety is already happening here in St. Louis. It's happening on a smaller scale, but it's gaining speed and momentum. And two of the ways we're already doing that is one, through the People's Plan. You can check out the People's Plan. It's peoplesplanstl.org. And the People's Plan is made up of 4 pillars. Making STL home is the first one. And that's where all the quality of life things live in the People's Plan. It is, safe, affordable, accessible housing for people, creating the conditions for that, addressing environmental justice issues. Anything that affects quality of life is where making STL home is where those initiatives live. Funding Our Future is all about making sure that tax policies are fair and equitable, and that the things that need our tax dollars, which is everything, are actually funded, and everyone, including corporations, are paying their fair share. Building an inclusive democracy. Look, democracy is an action word. It is a muscle that you have to flex and you have to build in order for it to work. So getting more people involved in the civically engaged in the process is part of how we make St. Louis safe, because we can then vote for elected officials who share our same values and want to help us build the St. Louis that we all deserve. And then, of course, re-envisioning public safety. That's where initiatives and campaigns like this one, the Defund, Re-envision, Transform campaign lives, and where the Close the Workhouse campaign lives. And the workhouse is closing in less than 2 weeks. The workhouse will be closed. And the $8 million that is allocated for that hellhole jail is we're already seeing dividends from that money being pulled out of the system and invested in people. We put a couple extra $1 million in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that's going to make it possible for not only people to get housed, but to stay housed. We're seeing it by money put into the Division of Supportive Reentry, helping people who have been inside of the criminal legal system, people who have been in jail or prison, making sure that they have the resources that they need to, be a productive member of society. And by productive, I mean being able to get a job, being able to get housing, being able to qualify for social services, being able to get their records expunged, because without that, so many of those doors and opportunities are closed to people. So we're already seeing this practice at work. What we are saying is that we can do more, we can do better. There's millions of dollars out there, and we can make this happen for the city of St. Louis. Lucy?
Emmanuel, next slide. Yeah, that may be Trey.
This is me. Cool. Yeah. So like Anna said, there's already work happening here in St. Louis. I'm really trying to build off, that momentum and align ourselves with all those efforts too. So this next part, I'm excited about just talking about like our approach to re-envisioning. So if you go to the next slide, Emmanuel. So you see this graphic that we created. So we think of public safety in a variety of different ways. I think a lot of people from a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different backgrounds. If you're from like an impacted area, like you're from North City, St. Louis, or you're from a more affluent area, I think that we all see public safety in a different way. What we're really trying to be intentional about with our Defund, Re-envision, Transform campaign is to incorporate all those perspectives and then wrap them in a vision that moves towards re-envisioning public safety in a holistic way, in a way that touches on all those different pieces. There's like even some points I wrote down like in our small group discussions around why is there a lot of violence in communities? Why, how do we cultivate, communities to help them care for their neighbors? What are some of those ways that we see violence and that we can react to them, but not always have the tools and language to know how to do that? So this lovely visual is a mountain, and this is a stream into like a lake or like a body of water. And we have, the upper stream, the middle stream, at the downstream. So if you actually can go back one, Emmanuel, and then, so just imagine yourself like imagine all of us are around this, like our public safety system lake. Like this is the lake. I should have said public safety system lake or something like that. That would have been like nice. But imagine we're standing around this lake and we see the water flowing into this lake. And this body of water is our public safety system. So, the system that we look to keep our community safe. And what we see flowing into this river are things that we see with our eyes. So we see that there is mass incarceration. We see that there is prevalence like high gun violence. We see that there is a lot of just lack of accountability to police that is filling this public safety system. So we see that it's broken. We see that something's wrong with like what's flowing into the river, but we just don't know like how to address it. So go to the next slide, Emmanuel. So we think of public safety in these three streams. So first I'll start with the downstream. So downstream is this thing that we see day to day. So those things that are visible, things that are prevalent that we see with our eyes. So like I said, like prevalent police violence and killing. So you see, like murders like George Floyd, like Michael Brown, 6 years ago, like, and everybody else in between, unfortunately, from our Black and brown family that have been killed by police. You also see like violence in communities as well. You see lack of police accountability. You see police not being held accountable for their actions. Or we also see like legal barriers and structures that protect police if there's police shootings as well. So kind of a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness there around keeping police accountable. We also see like droves of young Black and brown men, women non-binary family really, being pushed into prisons, trying to incarcerate our way out of violence. And we see that it's not working. So that's what we see downstream. And those are the things that, exist under the current system that we really try to fight for. But what's behind this downstream is another stream, is the midstream. What is behind the prevalent police violence and killings? What is behind the lack of police accountability? What's behind mass incarceration? And within this midstream, we have an over-reliance on police to solve violence and crime. So we have just a mental model or certain policies, certain policy decisions made by our government that really over-relies on police to solve violence and crime. And that over-reliance usually leads to police violence, and the over-reliance usually leads to like police misconduct, and instituting laws and procedures to protect police, this entity that we think protects us and reduces violence. Also, you see a lack of appropriate response to community needs. So you see people in distress, you see, there's like a gun violence situation, or there even is like, somebody who has a mental illness or has mental health issues, and they need the help, they need certain help, or they're being, they may have an episode or some situation where we need emergency response. Because we over rely on police, we sometimes call 911 when we need help, and then police show up. And there have been like plenty of times where police show up not trained on how to, deal with situations dealing with those with mental illness, or even those with substance abuse issues, or situations dealing with our unhoused population that have turned violent or deadly. I think there's a statistic I found, and don't quote me on this, but I think around almost 40% or so of police killings deal with someone who has issues around their mental health. So a huge issue. And then even further, the upstream. And so like, these are these root causes. So these are like things Lucy went over, like those individual, relational, community root causes of violence that exist and that funnel into like the midstream and downstream. So, we have economic devastation. We have neighborhoods that have suffered from segregation, from redlining, from intentional disinvestment from communities. And over the years, that has led to, lack of job opportunities, that has led to unaffordable housing, that has led to homelessness, all these things that push people to do things that they probably don't want to do, or push them to behave in a certain way, that leads to violence. Also, we have really significant investments into our police and carceral state. So on our last webinar, we went over the budget. We invest millions and millions of dollars, majority of our general funds budget and majority of our budget in general, on policing, on this the system that we think, again, it's a mental model that actually protects us. So these are all the different buckets and different streams on how we view public safety, and we try to re-envision public safety, and we want to use this model to think of solutions on how to re-envision public safety. So how can all of these things be true? I think sometimes there is like, I think, in my opinion, an unnecessary tension between some of the, like we want to have like youth programming and youth like program for like children that exist within our current society, who may have living in areas where they don't have a lot of job opportunities, and help them. And that's true, and we need to do that. But we also need to, invest in job training programs. We need to go upstream and look at why do Black youth have less opportunity than the white youth, like 5 miles away, and really ask those fundamental questions so that we can change the narrative for many youth. And so both of those things can be true at the same time. But this stream is really important to understand. So next slide, Emmanuel. So we really want to get you all's thoughts and opinions before we share like some of the solutions that we've thought of, and again, we're going to have another webinar too, our Transform webinar, that'll go into like the specifics of what we mean or some of the specifics that we think could help along this stream and along these three buckets of re-envisioning public safety. We want to get you all's ideas and opinions around those 3 areas through the chat. So we're not gonna have another breakout, but we do, if you all have like any ideas, so like, would you add anything to any of the streams, or what are some solutions and interventions that will re-envision public safety under each of the streams? So if you go to the next slide, Emmanuel. So we just invite you all, like, for the next, like, 3 to 5 minutes, just put in some of your thoughts in the chat. and we'll like share them out. And we'll also like capture this down, so we'll have it for future reference as well. So this can inform our own efforts. And we'll even send this out, after we have all of our information. But under each stream, under the upstream, midstream, downstream, just for like a brief overview again. So the upstream is like these root causes of crime and violence. So we want to address root causes of crime by understanding the crime as a product of economic devastation, social despair, and also like psychological, emotional hardship that a lot of communities face. This midstream is really focusing on responding to the existing levels of harm through alternative, more effective community-based practices and programs. So trying to shift away from over-reliance on police, trying to think about how can we respond to community needs as they exist now before we like significantly reduce like the root causes of violence. And this downstream is, engaging with policing in its existing form to mitigate harm, while never legitimizing the institution or lending support to the notion that modern policing is necessary or is the best way to address violence. So just some ideas there. So if you put those in the chat, then we can like share those out and have a discussion. So I see Emmanuel put in the chat, downstream, would like to see community grassroots support for victims of violence by police to better support them in their aftermath. Absolutely. There are a lot of families who have loved ones who have been killed by police or harmed by police, and they're left with a lot of economic burden and a lot of other issues that they don't often get support from the government on. So that's a great solution. Something that's like downstream that responds to police violence, police killings as it exists now. Lucy said, among folks who are struggling with substance abuse, harm reduction practices and decriminalization, not punitive or costly solutions. Absolutely. So this like midstream, like how can we look at the laws and like, how can we look at how we address and how we respond to these situations? Like how do we decriminalize mental health, decriminalize substance abuse? Why are I say this all the time, like why are drugs illegal? Why do we like force people to be considered criminals for like an issue, public health issue that they have? And why do we like put them in jail or accuse them of crimes and not actually give them the help that they need to push through their addiction safely? Mariah said, a shift from punitive justice to restorative justice for both civil and criminal offenses, access to affordable and culturally responsive physical and mental health care. So I see this like in the midstream as well, moving away from that punitive model to a more holistic healing justice model to actually address our harms. Lou said downstream, addressing the bail system. Absolutely, that is huge too. Like why do we, put people in poverty into jails, or, people can't get out of prison just because they're poor is a huge issue. Upstream, so upstream is affordable childcare. Absolutely. Yeah, that's, for like single mothers or like even those who, struggle, they have kids, but they have to work. That's a huge issue that kind of cultivates poverty or, family structure. Inez, I see +1 in that. Laura said midstream, lack of comprehensive, widely accessible database of non-police resources. Yeah, that's huge. Like what exists out there? What exists, what are the alternatives to police? So how can we gather all these resources to use to decenter police from our response? Public and universal pre-K, Lucy said, absolutely. Mariah said upstream universal basic income. Yes, put money in people's pockets. M. Leopold said downstream violence interrupters. Elise said housing. Yes, that's like honestly probably the root cause of a lot of like, if everybody had housing and a place to stay, a lot of our issues would just, be a lot less. Way cheaper than prisons for people who are worried about money. Absolutely. So get to know your neighbors, mutual aid, downstream community centers with childcare. Upstream, addressing the housing issues in the city. This is all really great, you all. Restorative practices to settle disputes. Upstream, direct cash release to people who need it without the strings of our current welfare system has. Yes, like literally put money into people's pockets. Midstream, downstream, transformative justice so that issues don't repeat themselves. Jobs. Yeah, you all got it. These are all good things. And keep them coming, so we can, have those cross collaborative. And we'll also save this chat too and recall all of your thoughts, and that'll help inform us. So, so yeah, if you go to the next slide, Emmanuel. So these are some of the, so in our campaign demands, we already have a list of like different solutions that we think can move us toward a re-envision public safety system. So within the upstream bucket, we have a quality, affordable, accessible housing, universal quality healthcare, safe and living wages, employment, education, basic fundamental things for us to even live and thrive, survive as people, let alone make us safe. This midstream, like this community-based mental health services, first responder alternatives, was something that I'm excited about. How can we build systems that, shift away from policing as we know it now, which I think is something that like we can do right now that is structurally like, it's like a systems level structural solution that can push us away from our current model. Downstream, so youth programming, income support during the pandemic, and like police accountability. So how can we keep our current system safe? Or how can we keep our current system accountable to the harms it causes? Next slide, please. And now I'm gonna pass it over to Jay to give us a brief recap before we close, or before we move into questions.
Thanks, Trey. So to recap, abolition is not just about getting rid of the systems that we know don't work. It's also about the belief that something new is possible and the collective effort that we put into creating this new system. I like to think of abolition as really about changing everything, not changing one single thing, but really changing everything, right? Which is, it's overwhelming, but knowing that we have a collective that can do it together, right? We are all together in doing this. It's not, and it is, I like to think of more so about building things than the destruction, tearing things down. The idea of a police-free world is neither naive nor unrealistic, but it will take work to re-envision the public safety system that we want, which is why it is a pillar of our hashtag defund SLMPD campaign. So some upcoming events that we have, we're gonna be doing a teach-in with Palestinian Solidarity Committee. We will send out an email about that, really talking about linking abolition and the liberation of Palestine to the liberation of Black folks here and brown folks here in the US, and the linkage of abolition worldwide. Our next webinar on transform, what we mean when we say transform, is coming up on July 14th at 6 p.m. And I can drop that link in the chat, so y'all can go ahead and register right now. Yeah, also, a lot of our orgs are going to be at a Juneteenth event coming up this weekend on the 19th, talking about the emancipation of slavery. That's what Juneteenth is. And also we know that, it still kind of exists in a way, right? In our prison industrial complex, in the prison system. And like the first folks that slave captures still exist, and those are the police. The first folks that are introduced to in the system, folks interact with the police. So we are all working. Yep, Fairground Park. Thank you, Inez. From 4 to 7, come through, say hello to us, get some food. Yeah. Next slide. All right, so we're gonna go into a Q&A. So y'all can start dropping your questions in the chat. You can go to the next slide, Manuel.
Yeah, Jay, I was just going to jump in and say that folks also have the capability to unmute themselves. So feel free to type in your question, or if you want to come off mute and just share a question or reflection with us, we've got a little bit of time to do that. Elise and Raj asked, do we know when the PSC teach-in is going to be? Still TBD, but we'll send an email out the moment it is confirmed. So thoughts, questions, reactions, what's on people's mind?
Nobody has any questions?
I do.
I
I
think
just
this is
realized
a good thing.
you have a
Go ahead,
reference to
Margaret.
defunding the vacant police positions in St. Louis. It was before the Board of Aldermen, wasn't it, at one point? Is status not filling the positions, defunding that.
You're breaking up a little bit, Margaret. Can you ask it again? Sorry.
Oh, the defunding the vacant police positions, wasn't that in the Board of Aldermen at one point? And what is, or what is the status of it?
It's done. Well, half of it is done. There are about 200 vacant positions in the police department, and the Board of ENA, which is made up of the mayor, the comptroller, and the president of the board, they defunded 98 vacant positions. So we've got about 100 more to go. We were advocating for those positions to be defunded through the budgeting process that is happening now at the Board of Aldermen. So I do know that the Ways and Means Committee has not voted on the budget yet. So there is still some hope that those positions could be defunded through this process. If you live in the city and you know who your alderperson is, I would encourage you to call, email, tweet, text, whatever, and encourage them to do that.
Thanks.
I see another question. How do we start creating these alternative systems? Yeah, I think that at the base level, we start to get to know each other. We start interacting with our neighbors. We start introducing ourselves to our community, right? Because that's what you need to do in order to know and go over and to your neighbor's house when you hear something going on to confront that. Also, there are initiatives, you know, in the works that I don't know if Trey wants to speak more about, but like Fort Ferguson is putting forth initiatives kind of similar to the CAHOOTS model of dealing with the first responder and mental health situation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, be on the lookout. There's some stuff brewing around like the alternative systems that we're trying to think through how to, you know, build an alternative like crisis response system. So what does it mean to send unarmed, you know, folks, civilian, trained, trauma-informed people to these crisis situations that are, you know, that police respond to and that has potential to be violent, you know, for the police who aren't trained to do that, and also who have guns and are able to shoot and kill those. So yeah, there's some stuff happening I'm super excited about. I think, you know, to Jay's point, yeah, like basic level, like getting to know each other, really like becoming a community. And I even think, you know, educate, you know, yourself too around like alternatives to police, have conversations with, you know, have hard conversations around, you know, ideation sessions around like what are some alternatives. I think, you know, it's okay to imagine a system without police, you know, like ask yourself like, what would a world without police look like? And why would that world be better? You know, what are some things we can put in place to make that a reality? So just some like fundamental basic things.
Lucy just dropped it in the chat, but I was gonna say we could literally just stop calling the police on people. We could stop calling the police on people who are struggling with substance abuse, people who are unhoused, on suspicious Black people in neighborhoods. We could literally just stop calling the police.
I think that some practices that I've thought about is redistributing some of the resources that I have access to, thinking about supporting movements for reparations, challenging capitalism in my own interactions and the way that I engage with the world, and thinking through if my initial reaction when I'm upset about something or when I'm in conflict with someone is to be punitive. And if that's the case, then I'm perpetuating carceral systems, norms, and I have work to do to think about my own relationships with folks, my individual interpersonal relationships. So that's another place, you know, just thinking about how we just one-on-one engage with one another, in addition to never calling the police. I saw Yoni put in a question, How do we build power in the neighborhoods represented by alders who have the most resistance to this vision? Thoughts?
Start going to your neighborhood meetings, because let me tell you something. I went to my neighborhood meeting a couple of weeks ago after having not been to one in over a year, and we need to start showing up at these neighborhood meetings because they tend to be filled with older, very white, conservative people who are then thinking about ways to further criminalize people and using the neighborhood associations to do it and to force that to happen. So we've got to start balancing out these meetings in a very, very real and substantive way.
Yeah. Another point, also contact your alder. We've gotten word that the alders are being tapped with, yeah, they're all being sent messages, spam, don't defund the police, don't defund the police, don't defund the police. So we need to be tapping them, especially your own alder. Like, I am nervous about the police in my neighborhood. In my ward, the police do this, 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 this. In my ward, like, tap your alder and talk about why you want the police to fund it from your ward, why you don't want to make a left on every corner and there's a giant shot spotter, real-time crime center up there taking up 3 parking spaces, wasting almost $1 million in our city budget to be ineffective, right? So tap your alder, reach out. I can send a link that has their email, it's all on the city website, their emails, their numbers. Yeah.
And just to uplift the follow-up point that Yoni shared, right? That is a component of it. And I will say, like, it's scary to do that alone. So let's connect with each other. Let's find partners in this work. Let's go to alder meetings and neighborhood meetings together. Let's think about this and, you know, be in community with one another. It is possible to do that. Another question, I think pre-COVID, the Close Workhouse was doing a lot of canvassing on the north side. Is canvassing still happening? Inez, you answered yes, and we're about to start back up. Anything else you wanted to add there? Inez, Jay?
The canvassing that we're getting ready to start doing is on the north side, and it mostly revolves around CTW stuff, but we plan on, the DRT coalition plans on spending the rest of our summer base building in the communities that like need it the most, that need to hear this message the most. And so I'm positive that once we figure out what that looks like, we're going to be emailing all of you, asking you to come out and help us.
And just to uplift another point, and resource shared by Kit, that AROC is in the process of doing some power mapping and numbers. And I'm not sure, Kit, how widely you could share that, or I think that's a great idea. And if there's other ways that folks could plug into that, that's another form of base building. Other questions, resources?
I'm on the phone. Can I just ask a question? Have you talked to those places where there is no such thing as military, there's no such thing as intelligence agent, there is no such thing as police, except maybe traffic cops like Costa Rica? Have you ever thought of looking at options in which this paradigm doesn't even exist? And how did they get to that place and stay there? That's just a thought. You know, there are activists down there, you know, doing things, but it's different. You know, the kids at this college say no, they can't call the police. There's nobody to call, so they have to talk to the students and work it out. It's just a thought.
That's a very interesting and great thought, and I definitely think we should look into that, because at this point we haven't.
Yeah, even like some of the research we've been doing for around the first responder alternatives has been like super focused on the U.S. I think even somebody asked me like last week the same question on how to look to like more international models. I know places like Japan, like Sweden, they like have those officers who either don't have guns or like just like the police force is like not what we think of when we think of police. And so, like I said, we definitely should look into that more as a campaign. So thanks for that note.
You could start by asking the International Student Union, or what alliance, whatever it's called, at each of the community colleges in the area, and you will find their students from all over the world, and can just, you know, find out, well, what do you all know? Because everybody has them, and then you could kind of just gather face-to-face stuff, and then from there get contacts from them too, especially if they're activists on their community, on their campus. So, let it pass.
What was the name of that group, the student group you said?
No, I was saying the International Student Alliances or unions or whatever they're called at each campus in the area has something for international students, and they have an office or something, I can't remember, whatever they want to call it, and the international students can come together to kind of get their issues resolved if they're not getting resolved through normal channels, especially maybe language. And every campus has one, and you can go there and say, hey, we want to get some information. Can you just ask international students when they get together next time if they could maybe contact us? We're kind of interested in, you know, what are you doing in your country? Some come and are not interested, but some do come as activists from other countries. So you can just ask. That way you talk to them directly versus a contact maybe over the phone in a different language.
Gotcha. Thanks.
If there are no more questions, we want y'all to stay connected. Again, our next webinar on Transform is Wednesday, July 14th at 6 p.m. The link is already in the chat. Please register right now. Text defund, that's all caps, DEFUND, to 314-789-8594 to stay up to speed. Get on our email list and, you know, get in the know of what's going on right now. Like we said, the budget cycle it wraps up at the end of the month. But right now there was a Board of E&A meeting where Louis Reed is trying to not pass it out of Ways and Means, trying to like hold it up, while Darlene and Tashara were really big on like getting it back into the hands of E&A. Louis Reed's talking about having a whole bunch of alternative meetings to hold up this process, which is scary on a number of reasons, because it's going to hold up the closure of the workhouse, it's going to hold up things like housing aid that's supposed to be coming out for folks right now facing the biggest eviction crisis. Yeah, so we still have work to do, and we want y'all all to be a part of it. So please get on the email list, sign our petition to defund the rest of the vacant positions. Like Inez had said before, there's 200 positions, and we got 98 to fund it, but we want the rest. And follow us at Defund SLMPD on IG and Facebook. We thank everybody for coming today.
Thanks, y'all.
See you in a couple weeks.
See you in a few weeks.
Yeah, thanks.
Keep imagining, keep re-envisioning. This is hard work, but practice makes perfect.